Well, welcome everybody to the Purple Tent, and we're going to start our second panel in just a moment. And the second panel is Cleveland and Northeast Ohio, what do we stand for and how do we embody our values? I'm just going to do a little summary of what the prior panel talked about before we start with our panelists, and then I'm going to start us out with a poem, which is a very unique poem. But what I heard in the last panel was that we get a lot of things done in our community because of the spirit of collaboration, because we have a culture that says we're going to work together, we're going to get things done. We know that there's inequality. We know that there are tremendous poverty issues in our community. We know that there are education issues in our community. We know that there are systemic issues dealing with the family in our community, that all of which need to be improved. But we're going to work together, we're going to talk to one another, and we're going to try to get things done. I heard also that this is something that does not occur in Columbus, does not occur in Washington, because there is not that cultural incentive to get things done. There's not that cultural embedding that we have here in Northeast Ohio. So we want to talk a little bit about what do we stand for if the culture of Northeast Ohio is encouraging that. And culture is so important to our children, to encouraging the next generation. And we're going to talk more about that in the next few days in terms of engaging millennials and how we influence our children. We have two educators here, so I know that's extremely important. So we want to talk about what do we stand for and how do we embody our values? What are the core values of Northeast Ohio? Do we actually live these values? How do these values contribute to the civility of our region? And are we a model for the country? I want to first introduce our panelists. On my right, on the audience's left, Judge Frankie Goldberg, who is judge of the Cuyahoga County Domestic Relations Court. Cleveland Jewish News publisher and CEO Kevin Adelstein, the executive director of the Northeast Ohio Education Association, Bill Lavezzi, and our national co-chair of Purple America and the past president of the Ohio Education Association, Pat Frost Brooks. And I'd like to get us started because we are talking about values. I happened to come across something just this morning, so it's very appropriate. And I came across something that I had stuck in a book years ago, and it was a poem written by a fourth grader in my daughter's fourth grade class. And I was so enamored with this poem that I stuck it in this book, and I even made some notes on it. And I want to read it as a way of jump-starting this panel, and you'll see why. Now keep in mind that this was, I believe, 1995, and it was written by a fourth grader as part of a classroom project. I dream, screamed a woman, that wars will end, that countries will stand by each other as friends, that differences will not divide the world, that peace will reign and people will not fear each other. But the woman's prayers fell on deaf ears. And the world kept on fighting. The ground turned red with blood, and the sky was filled with tears. But the people paid no heed. They sang of victory or swore revenge. But victory nor revenge, no matter how sweet, can make up for the sadness of all those lives lost. And the woman screamed, and the earth protested, but the people paid no heed. Pretty powerful, isn't it? Fourth grader. Now we look at the world today, we look at our country today, we look at the turmoil in Louisiana, in Dallas, in Ferguson, the turmoil that we had last year in Cleveland, and the turmoil around the world. And in many ways, have we changed? Have we gotten better? Have we gotten worse? And I think that it's very relevant to the values conversation that we're about to have. So what is it about Northeast Ohio? What do we believe in? Do we actually live those values? And are we a national model? Let's start with Judge Goldberg on the other side of the stage.
Well, I know that I can just talk about our court and what we do and try to mentor lawyers and guardian ad litems. You know, I always say to families that there is no prerequisite to be a parent. And, you know, there's prerequisites for medical school and for law school, but not to be a parent. And, you know, the divorce rate, you know, half of all marriages will end in divorce. And I always tell families, Stuart, that when I am divorcing them, that you're still a family, even though you're under the same roof. You'll share in many celebrations, whether that's, you know, graduations, birthdays, marriages, grandchildren. And I think we need to do a better job really being role models for our children from an early age. If there's conflict, whether in the marriage or just in general, we need to do a better job with regard to being parents, whether it's on the internet, whether it's cell phone use, whatever that is. We need to be engaged more with our own children and with our families and with the greater community.
Kevin?
Stuart, first of all, I want to congratulate you for what you're doing, instilling values in the community. What you do and your team is very meaningful, and it sends a powerful message throughout the city. So congratulations, and thank you for what you do with Values in Action. This is a great forum, and I'm happy to participate in it. So I think Frankie's right. She can speak as an expert, as a domestic judge, obviously. It's very important for our organization to do our part to instill values and to showcase the values of people that really don't get the limelight and that aren't being exposed to the good that they're doing for the community. And an example of that is something that we started in our organization last year, and it's something that never took place within the Jewish community, and it's called the 18 Difference Makers. And we opened up nominating period early last year, and we told the community, we want you to nominate people within the community. They don't have to live in Cleveland, they have to make a difference in Jewish Cleveland. So impact those within our community and nominate them for an 18 Difference Maker Award. Last year was our inaugural year, and we were flooded with nominations from the community, so much so that we decided in the inaugural year there was too much good. There's never too much good, but there were too many people to not acknowledge. So we identified 36 people. So if you know Jewish tradition, 18, the number 18 is very significant. It is Chai, and signifies life, and very powerful numeral. So we took twice that numeral and we identified 36 people in Cleveland that are making a difference. And we honored them at a celebration in November. And we said that these are people that are truly giving back, that do something that's selfless to impact the world around them. And then we took that a step further, and last year we started another event, if you will, and it's called Women in Leadership, in which the Honorable Judge to my right moderated one of our 2 panel discussions we did last year, acknowledging women in the Jewish community that people can look up to, that other women can embody, look at them and say, these people are making a difference, and to teach that to them. And we've been very successful in that. And that's very important. We'll continue that tradition that we started last year. We've continued it into 2016 and, God willing, beyond. Just a few examples of how important it is for us to really acknowledge values that are being done and the good deeds, tikkun olam, repairing the world, as we say when we created our event. And really trying to showcase that and sprinkle that amongst the community. And for right now, we need a lot of that, not only in our community, but around the world, as we've seen.
Absolutely. Bill, you're a longtime educator, and you're really also, your job has been to empower and inspire other educators throughout Northeast Ohio. The largest education association in Northeast Ohio is the NEOEA. And so you've seen from an educator's vantage point the values that we have here in the community. What do you believe those are?
Well, the first thing that impresses me about Northeastern Ohio and this whole community that we're talking about is its range and its diversity. The area that I work with through NEOEA covers an area from Sandusky to the Pennsylvania border, and from the Lake Shore down to about 3 counties, to the bottom of Mahoning County and Portage County. And within that area, you have this area that's very representative, it seems, of everything we have in the country. We have urban, we have rural, we have suburban, we have all the ethnic groups, we have just a tremendous amount of diversity in this area. And I think that helps us in values and in civility, because it brings together a lot of different points of view that still have some elements of commonality. So your neighbors may be different from you, your neighboring school districts may be different, or your individual schools may be different, but there's also a strong sense of community here in Northeastern Ohio that I think helps them to work together and to see some commonality in each other. One of the interesting things about the education community that I work with, and Pat, as you know, is a former president of the Ohio Education Association, which is the state union that we're affiliated with. NEOEA is not a union, but we are affiliated with them, and we have all these locals that are among our members. But there's another community of public schools out there in the American Federation of Teachers, and many of them are in Minnesota now for their annual meeting this week. And I remember early in my career thinking that they must be different because of organizational differences. There must be differences between us. And when I started meeting with them, I found there's essentially no difference at all. So I think we have the ability, because there are a pretty fair number of us crowded into this area, and because we have a diverse population within the area, I think we have an idea to see both differences, individual differences, and to observe the things that we have in common among us.
Thank you. Pat, what is, and you've had a unique perspective because you've facilitated programming for Values in Action Project Love. You've been a longtime educator. You've been in Columbus, where you've seen lots of differences, you know, and lots of separate agendas that people seem to have that separate people in silos. Do we have those same silos in Northeast Ohio? And if so, what are they? If not, what makes Northeast Ohio different?
Wow, Stuart, that's a very good question. And I too want to thank you for bringing your vision that you had, 2 years ago to life now today, and this is vision. And I look up there and I see the banner with our logo, OEA, Ohio Education Association, and it makes me so proud to see that logo up there, and having come out of my presidency and then to be a part, along with Susan, the Values in Action, and still working with students. Now, I want to be fair. I've only been back in Cuyahoga County for 3 years. So I'm getting to know my city all over again, having been in Columbus for the last 12 years. So I live the values that are there. And I still, when Susan and I were teaching our students about the values in action, we talked about that. And our differences, because they came from so many different school districts and counties where there are differences. And one of them that was highlighted was respect. And if you don't have that respect as one of your core values, then how can you stand on the others? You don't have a foundation for the others. And with respect, there also comes the love. And we talked about that you have to have the love and the respect, and you can't pull them apart. I've seen, the values in action when students are brought together from various counties all over Northeast to go down to Cleveland State. and they talk about that, and they put them in action when they go back to their school and having a project to do, and that brings it to life. And I've talked to the students there and how excited they are to come there and convene for that day or 2 days, and all of those nice yellow buses are bringing students in. So the 3 years that I've been back in Cuyahoga County, I have observed your organization making sure that young people understand what those values are, the significance of them, and not only that, but how to put them in action. And that's the important piece of values in action. How do you carry them out? What are you going to do when you go back into your community? What are you going to do when you go back to your school? When you see that there's an act of bullying, are you just going to sit back and observe it and not say anything? But who in your school community that you can reach out to privately without fear and say, you saw person ABC not being treated fairly, and how can that action be put in place so that everyone in that school understands what the boundaries are, what the safeties are, and that they can feel comfortable and secure no matter where they are. So on a scale of being an educator, yes, I do see the values being used. I see them being put into place. And for myself, being an educator, I too have to be the role model for the respect, for giving back to the community and whatever else the values are. I have to be that role model in order to teach and to show the students that I live them also.
Now, last year we had our issues with police-community relations. I know that you attended many events. Bill, I know you attended many events. I know that we sponsored our Civility Summit with 150 some people across 50 organizations to define core values. But my question is, if we are living the values that we aspire, and I think we're pretty much on the same wavelength, that we have great values in Northeast Ohio, how did that community police situation get out of whack? In many ways, it's still out of whack, certainly in our country, and it's certainly a work in progress here in Cleveland. But I think that's an important question, because there are lots of people that are going to be viewing the streaming. There are lots of other communities that are looking for answers. You know, obviously, many in our country are looking for answers right now. How did we get so far out of whack on a values scale that we had the unjustified killings of African American men? How are we so far out of whack now on a value scale nationally that we have African American men targeting police?
Shall I go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Well, the terrible events you mentioned, I'm not sure that those are the product of values. They're the products of individual people and individual choices those people made. The hopeful sign that I think we can see is the sign of communities coming together to recognize that those actions aren't the actions that they should be. So in a sense, to me, the action of the individual is the outlier. It's the test. It's not the norm. And that's the challenge that leads the community to reflect on its values. I had the opportunity yesterday to join the couple of thousand people who formed a circle on the Hope Memorial Bridge. And it was a wonderful, inspiring thing, the Circle the City with Love project, wonderful, inspiring thing to participate in. I'm not sure that response would have happened in isolation if we didn't feel some threats, if we didn't feel some danger. So this may be taking things a little bit too far, but it might be that we sometimes need to have challenges in order for us to reflect on what those values are. Otherwise, it's pretty easy to just cruise along take things for granted?
Kevin?
I think that's very telling. I think it's, look at each of these cases. I think emotions has played a dramatic role, significant role, where people want to take matters in their own hand because they think that the feeling is, I mean, we try and get inside these, people's heads, and we just can't. But feeling is that it's the system that's broken, and it's society that's broken. When it is, look at what happened in Baton Rouge yesterday.
Right.
One individual, as far as we know, one individual did all that destruction. Does that mean that there's something wrong with the system? It's really hard to not think that when those that are take an oath to serve and protect, society can't protect themselves, and that's troubling, and I would love for one or both of the candidates that are going to take place between here and Philadelphia next week to really talk about that as a problem in our country and how do we fix it, and roll up their sleeves and work together to find solutions so that this doesn't continue happening. I heard a stat yesterday that President Obama has in his tenure has delivered, I think it was, don't quote me on this, something like 17 of these such benedictions, if you will, from what he did yesterday, delivered from the White House. That's troubling. That's troubling. And in the last year, look how many has taken place. So how do we fix it? I think is that a value? Is that a value with society? Is that a societal value problem? Is it certain individuals that have, clearly, individuals have their own agendas?
Right. Or, and I want to turn to our former prosecutor on this, who's now a judge, Francine Goldberg. Is it a symptom? Is it a symptom? In other words, is dysfunction a symptom of things that have been bubbling over, that whether in our community or whether nationally, where our values are out of whack, where I heard the video that young man who targeted the police put on in Louisiana and Baton Rouge put on Facebook, where he said, protests don't work, conversation doesn't work, we need to fight back. So all of a sudden you have that as a symptom of perhaps some thing that is out of whack in society, but you've seen that as a prosecutor.
I'm not going to address the shootings, but I will say dialogue, community engagement, community involvement. When I campaign, I go to a lot of the churches in the Cleveland area, and we talk about back to basics, family values. I mean, look at what happened when we had that parade of 1.3 million people in that small area, the population of Cuyahoga County. That to me was a wonderful, wonderful thing, and that everyone really, other than unfortunately a shooting of a juvenile took place, but think about how everyone was civil. Think about how everyone was celebrating Cleveland and the team and the kind of community that we've built. And I think that we have a lot to be proud of in that sense.
Did those people in that rally, and turning to you, Pat, on this, 1.3 million people, and I heard even prior to that celebration, I heard people, even as we were entering the 7th game, people were saying, boy, you know what, the community is so happy, and people are just treating each other differently. And you know what, by the way, we see this, and people have written articles about this between Thanksgiving and Christmas, you know, how people treat each other differently. So is it a matter of a community in inspiring people in the community to kind of see a cup half full as opposed to a cup half empty? Is it that positivity breeds positivity, or what is that?
Yeah, I think that's what it is, Stuart. It's being positive and having something to aspire to look for, that gives you the hope. And you talked about, you know, the values, where's that breakdown? And I believe that over decades, that something has been eroding the values away. Being a classroom teacher for 25 years before taking on my positions at OEA, I was able to build a community within my classroom and take time and do bridge building and walk the community. I taught in East Cleveland. I taught 1 year in Maple Heights and then 24 years in East Cleveland. I was able to walk the community with my students that first week of school and find out what they were up against and where they lived and how they came to school. We were able to go out and have field trips. So we were able to build a relationship with our students. We knew who our students' parents were, who their guardians were. It was truly a community. And if something happened in someone else's classroom and it was my student, I was able to go over there and tell the student, you know, you don't mess up for this substitute. This substitute is a teacher like I am, and that person is to be given the respect just like you give me the respect. So over the years, because of, and I'm going to say that because of the funding situation, a lot of things that we did in our classrooms to build a community, to build a sense of belonging, to build a family, became eroded because of what teachers have to do now, and they have to find the time. They have to be that deviant to go outside their boundaries and find the time to build those relationships. And many times, educators don't have that time. Bus drivers don't have that time. Cafeteria workers don't have that time to build that community again because they see the students just for a short time. So over decades, things have become eroded, and now we're bringing it back. Educators are finding the way to build the community again, to build the bridges with the courts, to build the bridges with other organizations that come into the schools to help build those bridges and to get those resources so that they have the respect, so that they have the success that they need, so that they are great students and that they are productive when they graduate from high school, whether they're going to college or whether they're going into a career.
Well, I know I appreciate that, and I want to turn to Bill to further expand on the role of the teachers. It seems to me, and I know from our own experience with Project Love programming in the schools, that more and more principals are reluctant to pull students out of the classroom for the academic instruction in favor of the social emotional instruction, where, I mean, as Pat said, the teachers are the values glue to a certain extent of the community, or the values bridge between the community expectations of here's what we stand for and the family expectations. Sometimes the family's letting their own children down on those expectations, and it requires the teacher very often, or something that happens in the education space, to kind of pick that up. So are we giving the education space, not only as a community but nationally, short shrift in not enabling the teachers to do their best in building the values of the next generation?
Well, the easy answer is yes, we are, but I think that might be a little too easy to just let it stand at that. I think that children are complicated creatures. We're all complicated creatures, and I think children, as they grow up, they're learning about the world, and they're evaluating everything that they hear and everything that they see. And so I think that when a child hears about values from only one source, that can be very powerful, but it also can be challenged by another source. One of the reasons that we send our children out to schools, those of us who do, and I know that there are homeschool families, but one of the reasons why we send our children usually out to schools is, we may not think about it. Obviously, it's to learn the subject matters and the different scholarship things that we teach in schools. But I think another reason we do is for the socialization that takes place by bringing them in common with other kids who aren't their relatives, who aren't their blockmates in the neighborhood, other kids who might be different from them. I think that's another reason that we bring kids to school. And sometimes that socialization process doesn't look too pretty because you can't necessarily write the rules for it. I mean, you can write rules, but you know that part of the socialization process is going to take place outside adult eyes. There's going to be interchanges and conversations and things like that that the adults won't see. But what you try to do, I think, is to set up a situation in which children are getting lots and lots of information about values from lots and lots of different sources, and hopefully they're the right sources. I mean, obviously you don't want them to be from the wrong source, but you want to get different viewpoints. It's not just the family, although the family is obviously very important, probably the most important component of it all. But it's also from the school, but it's also from other things. The kids who participate in Scouts or other activities where they have adults around them. Churches and synagogues that maybe have youth programs that bring kids in contact with adults so that they have some other kind of an exchange. One of the things that I've always been startled by, impressed by, is the effect on a youngster that an adult can have who is simply an adult. Not necessarily an adult authority figure, but simply an adult in that child's life modeling something. Whether that modeling is how to make something. I had an experience yesterday at my church where I was helping out in the choir, and they invited some kids to come up and sing in the choir. And the adults were there kind of showing the kids where's the music and where are we on this song and how are we going to do that. And it was modeling. It was just a bunch of adults. We weren't teaching them in a formal sense. We were just being adults around the kids. Now that was, I mean, church is about values, but it was also about how to do the job right. That we're in front of people and we don't talk now. You know, we pay attention to what we're doing. We concentrate on the director. All those kinds of things they're related to values. They're related to discipline and to respect and self-respect. So to me, the school is part of the system. It's not the whole system, but it's part of the system. I guess the last thing I would say then, in the context of all that, it's very important that schools feel empowered to understand that whether they do it explicitly or implicitly, they're teaching values. The things that the teacher corrects and doesn't correct, the thing that the teacher rewards and doesn't reward, the punishes and doesn't punish, those things teach lessons. And those lessons aren't necessarily lessons that the educator articulates. And that's not just the teachers, it's, as Pat said, the bus drivers and the cafeteria workers and everybody else in that system. So I think it really helps to get kids seeing and hearing and having demonstrated some of these common values from a lot of different directions. I think the kids are smart enough to say, oh, I see that person listens. I see that person listens. Okay, and I see that person respects and that person follows instructions.
So then they absorb it kind of by osmosis. You know,
I think that's real powerful.
They're absorbing from the community.
I think it's real powerful. Mm-hmm.
I know, speaking of setting that example from multiple sources, I know that in student surveys now of impact on students, used to be that that schools were number 2, family was number 1, church was number 3, media is number 1. So in that regard, Kevin, what does media do? What's the responsibility of media to convey these values of a society, of a community? I know that you're in you have kind of a dual advantage because you came out of Cleveland.com. Mm-hmm. So you saw this community, and you're now in the Cleveland Jewish News, so you see this community. So you kind of have two different vantage points. How can you expand on the role of the media to have and take responsibility for those kinds of values?
So Cleveland.com and the Plain Dealer have 100 reporters that are covering the convention this week. We have 4.
Right.
So
right.
That gives you a feel for our role. Yet we feel as though it's very relevant there are some great stories to be told in our city about what's taking place a couple blocks away downtown. To answer your question, Stuart, we have a tremendous responsibility. We are, I think Mr. Peter alluded to earlier on your earlier panel, where he pinpointed, he brought to fruition the role the media plays in society in general. And I think people are impressionable. And I think we have a responsibility, we accept the level of responsibility. We don't create the stories, okay? We know, no matter what anybody says, we don't create them. There are some organizations that certainly do. You call those media companies sensational, you know, they have a clear mission. We have a clear mission. We are a news organization. And we pride ourselves on 3 criteria. Is it Cleveland? Is it Jewish? And is it news? And if it's all 3 of those, it's a home run as far as we're concerned, in terms of we should be telling that story to our readers. We should be looking for angles to be able to share that with our readers. If it's 2 of them, it's pretty close. If it's just Cleveland, as in this convention is, there aren't very many Jewish angles to this convention other than Donald Trump's daughter and son-in-law are Orthodox Jews. And she's a convert and you know, converted to, you know, Judaism. So outside of that, the one Jewish speaker at the convention pulled out. That was their rabbi. And he was to have given a invocation, and yesterday, a couple days ago, he decided that he wasn't going to come for whatever reason. So we still look for angles. It's very important for us because this is a Cleveland event. This is when Playhouse Square unveiled that gorgeous masterpiece of a chandelier in the heart of our downtown city. It was on the front page of our newspaper. There wasn't anything Jewish about that, but we felt it would be irresponsible for us not to tell that story to our readers, even though they can get that through other media channels. We understand that. But our readers look to us to tell them stories that aren't being told by Cleveland.com, by the Plain Dealer, by the TV stations, by the radio stations, by, you know, the national news outlets. And often it's very easy for us to find those stories. It's never a stretch. We ask ourselves in our news meetings, what's the Jewish angle? Why are we telling the story? And our journalists are our reporters are very, very mindful of the mission of our company, and our managing editor is very mindful of the mission and the need to keep anything that they read in our newspaper or read on our social media channels or on our website, keep it relevant. We're not short of Jewish sources to be able to tell stories. We've already in one day told numerous stories that have been posted to our website and to our social media channels today alone, just with people coming in from all over the world that are Jewish, that have a Jewish thought or mission about this particular election. And it's so easy to talk about it because that's why we're here for the RNC. But again, as I say many, many times, we are nonpartisan. We draw the line in the sand. We have been for 52 years since our existence. We don't have a horse in the race. And we don't editorialize as it relates to, unless we as a company don't. However, we employ editorial journalists who are columnists, who are paid to give their opinion on candidates in elections, and we let them do that.
Well, let me give you the quintessential Cleveland Jewish story.
Okay.
That everybody else on the panel can expand on.
Have we told it yet?
It's been told many times, but not necessarily from a Jewish angle. In 1938, 2 Jewish 18-year-olds from Glenville High School created Superman. And they created Superman around the values of truth, justice, and the American way. Okay, so are these values that we have in our community today? Those values resonated with 2 Clevelanders that have made probably the most recognizable character in the world, arguably the most recognizable character, maybe with the exception of Mickey Mouse, is Superman. And truth, justice, and the American way, do we have those values in our community today, and how do we each convey those values to our children? So from a prosecutor and court point of view, from a media point of view, from an education point of view? Starting with you, Frank.
Absolutely. Someone once said that civility costs nothing and buys everything. I think what Bill was saying too, you know, our children need role models, and I've always, as a former prosecutor and as a judge, I always have interns from all backgrounds, diverse backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, whether it's in the courtroom or in the courthouse. So they get to interact with different kinds of people, and that's something that the late Congresswoman Stephanie Tubbs Jones always taught me, to appreciate the different values of different backgrounds, different people, different religions. And I think especially in today's day and age with our children, with the internet and everybody's on their screens and nobody's looking up, no one's looking face to face anymore,
Right.
and appreciating someone's differences. And I think it's important, when I campaign steward around Cuyahoga County in the 59 communities, I cannot tell you how wonderful people are from all different kinds of backgrounds, knowing that, you know, I'm a Jewish candidate or a Jewish judge, and the appreciation and the diversity that Cleveland has. You know, there's that t-shirt that says, I liked Cleveland before it was cool. And it's true.
I own it.
I have it too.
And the sweatshirt.
And I have the mug. We have so much to be proud of and to talk about. When I have lawyers in domestic relations court, sometimes it can get uncivil. I created something called the Wall of Happiness for happily divorced couples. Those kinds of things, those small things, and having a young person see, you know, the glass is half full, and to be in different parts of our community. We have so much to be proud of and so much to talk about. So many of the good things that this city is about, and it's that beauty that we are different, and to respect those differences. And I think we have a job to mentor these young people and to be role models, whether they come with us to work, whether they have interns. As a former prosecutor, when we had drug vigils, Stuart, in the community and curfew sweeps, the young people got to know us. We would speak with them, with their parents. They got to know the police. That kind of community engagement and those relationships, I think, last a lifetime, and they leave an indelible mark on our young people.
Well, what I hear you saying is that none of that happens without civility, that the civility
correct.
is kind of the foundational thing, that if that card falls over, that we can accomplish lots of things together. And if civility, and I think Pat mentioned respect, you know, if that card is a barrier, then nothing else can happen.
Those are the bricks and mortar.
Yeah. So we do recognize Superman as being the founder, as being Jewish. In fact, we had our editorial and design team a couple years ago at the anniversary of Superman that we celebrated throughout the world, I think. We had a beautiful cover design. It was a Superman cover. Nothing Jewish about it other than the founders, the creators of Superman, and it won a international, local, and regional award for design and excellence in storytelling. And then we did an entire pull-out section of Superman. So we have told this story. It's a beautiful story, and I think it's very appropriate, Stuart, because I think as a father of a 7-year-old, I have a responsibility. I'm petrified. My single greatest fear in the world is raising a child today. It petrifies the heck out of me. And it's not because of the values that we're instilling in her, it's what she absorbs outside of our home and in the classroom and on the playground and at everywhere that she goes, at birthday parties, in restaurants, when she sees people disrespecting each other, and she sees people that don't say thank you and that don't say please and that don't open the door for one another, hold the door open for one another. And it's absolutely my single greatest fear in life right now.
And you wonder, what is that? How are those examples diluting the values that you and your wife
Absolutely.
give your daughter?
Absolutely. And we can teach her right from wrong. And I think we've done a pretty good job based on our observations of her and seeing how she treats other people. She spent the day yesterday with her best friend and their family at her birthday party, and the parents that were through the birthday party wanted to pick her up and took her with them to the party, and then they took her out to dinner. And when they pulled with not only their family but the grandparents too, who my daughter has met a couple times. And when the parents brought her home last night, standing at the top of our driveway, they said, you know what? It's such a pleasure because she always says thank you. Thank you for taking me. Thank you for including me. She says please and thank you with servers. And that's not us, that's her because she's being a sponge. But it's, again, what's going to happen a year, 2 years, 3 years from now when she leaves grade school and she goes into junior high where there's, you know, the surroundings are magnified 5 times because you have 4 other schools that come together. And that's what really scares me. And it's about values. It's about what she sees on television and what she hears. And I think, again, it's so easy to not highlight the 2 people that are vowing to be leaders of our country over the next 2 weeks and that are going to for the next several months leading up to November. It's what is the message that they're going to send down to my daughter and her peers.
Exactly.
And that's troubling.
So given that the community has such a pervasive impact on children, you know, that, you know, we send our children out from the family, we send them to the community, to the drugstore, to the movies, to, you know, to college. We send them for a good portion of their lives to school, you know? I mean, how many hours a day?
Be 8, it could even be longer than that.
Sure.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in that context, you know, we can't ignore education and the importance of education. So what expectation do you have as a community member of our educators? And then I want to turn to the educators because I know that sometimes educators feel that there are over expectations. So, but what expectations would you have of your daughter's teachers?
Well, there's no greater role in society than a teacher. And I have family members that are teachers. My sister-in-law has been teaching in the public school system for 25 years. And my wife was a teacher before she was forced to stop working to take care of our family. And she was trained as an educator. So I have great respect for educators. There is absolutely nothing that compares, with all due respect, to private schools rather. There's nothing like a public school education. I'm a product of public schools. And I think you can never, ever be overeducated. And I think the role of a teacher, quite frankly, I don't know how teachers do it, because they deal with so much diversity in the classroom, so many challenges in the classroom, and that ratio. In my daughter's, you know, first grade class last year, there was a 22-to-1 ratio, 22 students to 1 teacher in a public school. And you have, you know, and my daughter goes to, I think most would argue it's one of the finest public schools in the state of Ohio, according to many surveys that have been done.
What district is it?
Solon Public Schools.
Yeah.
So
very good district.
Not every student and parent is blessed like we are to send our children to that school.
I believe an NEOEA district, right, Bill?
Actually, Solon is an independent school
Oh,
district.
boy. Okay.
They have their own independent union there. There's a whole story behind that goes back before Pat and me.
You want Joe Regano's phone number? I don't have it, but
I wouldn't ask the superintendent to organize a union.
so to answer your question, I think it is as monumental of a job as anyone would argue. The officers that are protecting us, the firefighters that are protecting us, the judges that are protecting us every day. I think they're setting the tone for my child. My child will spend more time in a classroom than she will in our own home, and throughout the course of the day.
But maybe this is a commentary on our society, not only here in Cleveland, but around the country. Because I've talked to a lot of educators about this. And when I was a kid, you know, growing up in the 60s and 70s, I know that, you know, it came Christmas time, and my mother said, you must take a gift to your teacher. You know, the teacher was up here. Am I correct?
That's right. We all got that rose water.
Now, Now,
Not
the
all.
role, the perception, I hear what you're saying, and I happen to agree with you about the role of the teacher and the importance of the role of the teacher. But the perception on the part of many parents and many business leaders as well is that the teacher's down here now. Why? I'm just curious, why has that occurred in our society? When we rely so much on our teachers to not only give our kids a proper education, but give our kids the values in the classroom as well.
Well, we have to set the tone for that child. We have to send them to school ready and prepared to learn and to be taught.
Yeah.
And as much as we assume the greatest level of responsibility in teaching them in our home, our own values that we want them to have. And what my values are may not be Frankie's values. It may not be Bill's. It may not be Pat's. It may not be yours. It's how are we raised? How do we want, doesn't mean we don't want the same thing for our children, but I think, I wouldn't want to meet the people that don't feel that respect for teachers and that level of responsibility. And I'm not saying that because I'm to my immediate left are two educators. I'm saying that because I truly believe that and I'm very passionate about, a quality education and being able to teach our children the fundamentals of, what we want them to learn and get out of school. I'm more prepared in life because of my education than anything else. And how do you argue with that?
Bill and Pat, how do you feel about that?
Well, Stuart, I want to circle back again and push back on one of the questions you asked about Superman and truth, justice, and the American way. And with me being a minority female, a black female, those emotions stir in me. And we're all mature adults up here, but when we're talking about the emotions and what our young people are doing, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for that truth. And whose truth are they looking for? They're looking for justice because they know that they aren't getting justice in this system. And the American way, whose definition of the American way is it? Is it white America values the American way? Is it me being a black female, middle class, the American way? Or is it someone else's American way? What are we aspiring to what that American way is? And I think that's what's happening now over the last 2.5 years is that people are seeking the justice, the truth, and the American way and trying to define it. And while we're trying to define it, we have all of this disruption and this upheaval. So I just wanted to take a minute, not to gloss over, but to bring up and to push back about whose justice and whose American way and what truth are we seeing.
So do we have enough conversation about that? And have we been lacking in our conversation in our community as well as nationally about truth, justice, and the American way? And all of a sudden, after we've kicked it under the rug for many, many years, the dust is starting to circulate in the air. Is that basically what you're saying?
The dust is beginning to circulate, but you got to bring it back in so that you get that dust ball and you get that collective action. I think that's what we're really looking for, that collective action.
Is the collective action, does it start initially with conversation?
It starts most definitely with dialogue, conversation, small group, and then let it expand, just like you did with the civility summits, and just like what you and Susan have done with the students, bringing them in and starting that conversation and let that organically go out into their communities. So there is hope of kindness, of loving, and of understanding.
And are those happening in the classroom?
They're happening in a small vacuum because of the time constraints that we have. And that's why I said the teachers are being those deviants and finding the time to have those conversations. And as you, Kevin, you've done remarkable well with your daughter, trained them up, and they will not depart from that. And she will carry those values with her because they're her core. You and your wife, and just like I did with my daughter, they're core. Even though they may go off to college and may find something else to deviate from that, but they're going to come back to it because that's their core. And we have trained them well.
That's
Well-
encouraging.
And we hope that this conversation continues in the classroom starting in the fall, so that we're giving, lots of material for classroom teachers. They have this kind of
They have
values
to.
conversation. Just as we're closing now and we're running out of time, I'd just like to turn to each one of you and mention one value of what Northeast Ohio stands for. Frankie?
Community. Strong communities, I think, make better families, stronger families, and stronger values.
Kevin?
Look at the hashtag that the Cleveland Cavaliers established. All in. Unity. I think we all want the same thing. It's unity. Bring us all together.
Bill?
And this ties in with something we just mentioned. I think one of the problems that we run into in education in particular, but it's really something we see in society, is a lot of finger pointing. We have a lot of people who want to say, the problem with this, whether it's education or whether it's politics, whatever, the problem is you. There's a lot of that kind of stuff. And I think the value I would submit, it's always better to think, what's the positive of that? What's the positive inverse of that? And the positive inverse of the finger pointing is each one do what we can do. And don't necessarily be looking out for what the other person's doing. I'm going to do what I can do, whether you do what you should do or not.
Take responsibility.
I'm still going to do what I can do.
Pat?
For me, giving back. I've seen Northeast Ohio give back when there's a need, when there's a food bank or someone needs shelter or someone's home is burnt down or whatever. They give back to the community. So I think that's the value that I see happening here in Northeast Ohio is giving back.
And I would say kindness. I think that people in Northeast Ohio are extremely kind. I think that we see that through the giving back. We see that through the Meals on Wheels. We see that through what Greater Cleveland Congregations, the movement that they started. And we see it also through the community conversations that we had last year dealing with our police and community issues. So I want to thank all of you for this great panel. I want to thank everyone who tuned in to the live streaming and the teachers and other professionals that are going to be using this as material in the fall. I know that the conventions are an intriguing part of the American democracy and the presidential election, and we hope that today we've jump-started it a little bit about talking about who we are and what we stand for in Northeast Ohio. Thanks everyone, and thank you those who are tuning in.
Thank you.